Welcome to the show. I want to do something a little bit different with a series of conversations with some of the brightest, smartest Liberty people I know who have widely divergent views on the debate over Israel and Palestine and what happened in the Gaza Strip. And I want to challenge all of you to do something that most Americans can't do anymore, which is listen and engage and debate with views that are at polar ends of each other on this subject. And that's something that we could probably do here. So you're going to be hearing from various people with smart opinions, some of whom you'll love, some of whom you'll hate, some of whom hopefully change your mind and make you think a little bit more about this very difficult, maybe impossible issue that's happening in Israel. Congressman, good to see you.
Matt, great to be here.
First thing in the morning, I was scrolling through your Twitter feed and discovering just how popular you are in Washington, D.C. It's really a tour de force.
I wouldn't use the word popular, maybe infamous.
Infamous. So I'm working on this special series for my show where I wanted to get different people from a liberty perspective who have different takes on liberty, on Israel versus Palestine, and more importantly, what should the U.S. role be in that conflict in the Middle East. And you immediately came to mind because of your infamousness. Is that a word? Infamousness?
Yeah, I think it is.
Of some of the votes you've taken on what I would consider some of these votes are very consequential, but others are just political posturing. And maybe we could sort of weed through these various things because you, I think we're still trying to compile just how many times you've had to opine in the House of Representatives on Israel just in the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, it's somewhere between half a dozen and a dozen.
Yeah.
Votes on Israel, and then a constellation of votes dealing with Hamas or Iran or anti-Semitism. It's been Israel week for 4 weeks in a row in Congress. You know, we need to get back to naming post offices. I joke because that used to be the mode of Congress, but now the mode is this. Meanwhile, our own country is burning. I mean, we're so far in debt. Oh, I brought my debt clock to wear.
Yeah, you should definitely have that on.
Yeah.
It's relevant to this. I was trying to remember the name of the general who said, it was during the Tea Party days when we were actually trying to rein in the debt. There was a general that said that the national debt was the single most threat to national security.
Well, it definitely is now. It's a threat to everything. It's a threat to internal security, to paying your bills, to interest rates, to buying a car. It's catching up with us. And because, I'm not sure if you can catch this on camera here, but this has Wi-Fi, and it goes to Treasury's website once a day and gets the actual debt to the penny. And so it's a little bit sobering. Every morning, this thing logs itself on using your local Wi-Fi access to Treasury and downloads that number. And some mornings I wake up and it's jumped $50 billion overnight because they've gone out and done another auction of treasuries or bonds or whatever. And what I've noticed is that recently those jumps are greater. The rate of increase is increasing.
Yeah.
We call that the second derivative.
Yeah. And it's relevant to any conversation about America's posture in foreign conflicts because certainly Ron Paul has pointed this out, but I don't think it's new with him that empires die because of their financial situation.
Right.
That's how it is.
Well, and I didn't mean to diverge too much from the topic. I just want to put it all in the context of we haven't done the 12 spending bills. Not a single one of those has been conferenced with the Senate and gone to the president, even though we're on our second speaker here. They just did our second CR, continuing resolution, in lieu of the funding bills. I guess because we've run out of time. But the irony is we've got enough time to do almost a dozen resolutions bills or supplemental spending bills for a country of 10 million, less than 10 million people. And I think we need to, it's not that we should ignore everything in the world, but we need to get our priorities straight and get our own house in order. But that's the context in which all of these votes are happening.
Well, you would even wonder, you're in a unique perspective because you are a federal legislator. Your job is to opine on the proper things that the federal government should be doing. And we have spent a good part of the last 2 years just talking about Ukraine and Putin and Israel versus Hamas. And I think your general position is this is not our primary job. Like we don't get involved in every foreign conflict that there is.
Well, we do get involved in every foreign conflict there is, but we shouldn't get involved in every foreign conflict there is. Yeah. Yes, that is my position.
Was there? I want to talk about specifically that first resolution, which seemed like an authorization. Of military force. But was there a similar vote on Ukraine? I don't remember anymore. I assume there was.
There were votes on Ukraine dating back to 2014. And I remember voting against those. It was saber rattling against Russia. We were going to impose sanctions on Russia, call them, evil, et cetera, et cetera. And this was going to keep us out of a war, keep Ukraine out of a war if we would just do all these things and rattle the sabers. And I voted against that stuff too. So yeah, there were lead ups to the war in Ukraine that went on for, 8 years before the war in Ukraine, where I was voting no on those things. But now, we have these votes in Israel. We had an early vote right in the wake of the attack on Israel. We had an early vote, but I voted, it was one of these generically titled, great sounding, resolutions, support our, ally Israel. But when you dig into it, they're open-ended commitments of military assistance that don't say limited to technology or materials. It could include troops. People say, oh, well, you're just, you're going well beyond what it was intended for. No, if it doesn't say not including troops, then it does include troops. I'm sorry. So there were, things like that. It sought to expand the conflict. Here we just had an attack from Hamas on Israel, and it was condemning Iran in the resolution of support for Israel in the context of this attack. So where we should be seeking to narrow the conflict and constrain it geographically and politically, the resolution immediately was trying to expand it to other Middle Eastern countries. So those were two of the reasons that I voted against it. But and that was one of the first resolutions we voted on in the last 3 or 4 weeks.
And you were alone on the Republican side on that one?
I was the only Republican no. And
I've seen this in hit pieces on you.
You should splice that in if you can, or at least link to these ads.
We'll link to the AIPAC hit ads that they're running against you, and I definitely want to talk to that. But let's establish what this was first. Yeah.
All right. So there was that resolution. There were some other problematic things in it that I don't remember right off the bat, and then then a couple more resolutions. One condemning Iran, I think, and suggesting, that was another thing. It said we should do sanctions against Iran, and I'm generally against sanctions. But there was another, shortly thereafter, there was a rush to send more money to Israel after that resolution passed. And in this vote, I got one other Republican to vote with me on the $14.3 billion. They said, well, okay, even though we give Israel $3.8 billion, as a matter of fact, every year it's in our own military appropriations now, that $3.8 billion goes to Israel every year, even though we regularly do that, and we've already done that, and that's in one of those 12 appropriations bills that's sitting over in the Senate that they haven't passed. We need to hurry up and send them another $14.3 billion of additional aid right now. And so we had that vote, and Marjorie Taylor Greene and myself were the only Republican no's on that. I forget how many Democrats we got, but there were probably several Democrats who voted against it as well.
At Kibbe on Liberty, freedom is a lifestyle 24/7, something you live and breathe and wear every day. If that describes you, you need the very best Liberty swag in the market today, just like this shirt I happen to be wearing. Go to freethepeople.org/KOL and check out our exciting merch. You too can love Liberty and look cool. And I'm guessing that the reason that went through the House is because they knew they could pass it, because it strikes me that some of these big globs of money that we're sending to these foreign countries just come out of the Biden administration without any sort of congressional opinion on it.
Right, and that one was a little had a little carrot on it for conservatives, because it said we're going to take the money out of the IRS, and we're going to, take that money from the bureaucratic state and give it to a foreign state. So there was a little bit of a carrot there.
Is that symbolic? Like,
listen,
that's not going to happen.
It's not going to happen. My wife is great at summing these things up. Because they call it a pay for, right? That's Washington, D.C. speak for, the shuffling of the cups and the pea moving around the pea pod. They call it a pay for. They're going to offset spending with some other reduction in spending. But my wife said, when you guys say you're paying for something, what you're doing is you're reducing a program that's not paid for and compensating that to another program and saying you're paying for it. But the original program that you're reducing wasn't itself paid for. Now, she said it a lot more succinctly than that.
This sounds how my wife budgets for Christmas, by the way.
You can't take something that's not paid for and say, okay, we were going to borrow money to go on a ski trip, okay? Well, instead of borrowing that money to go on a ski trip, we're going to borrow this money to buy a motorcycle, okay? And so that'll be paid for. Yeah. No, it's not paid for. It's still borrowed money.
Yeah.
And the reality is, like you said, they're still going to give the money to the IRS someday.
Yeah.
Like, they're not. And then finally, the CBO says, oh, by the way, I don't put much weight in what the CBO says, but the CBO said, oh, by the way, when you take money from the IRS, you're going to collect fewer taxes, which is actually good reason to take money from the IRS. But when you take money from the IRS, you're going to collect fewer taxes. So you're actually exacerbating the economic or budgetary impact of this by using that particular pay for.
So this is the first vote, and this reminds me, the reaction to your vote reminds me a little bit of 2020 when you forced Congress to come back and vote on a multi-trillion-dollar bailout of the lockdown.
What I don't understand, maybe we can get to this later, is why people get so mad at me when a bill passes 424-1, and it's like overwhelmingly passed. Why are they still mad at me if I'm the one? It's because as long as there is one person dissenting, one person has a voice to point out what's wrong with it. The 424 who vote for it, even though in the back of their minds they know this is flawed, and they, for some reason or another, maybe for good reasons, they decide to vote for the overall thing in the end. They can never speak to the flawed portions of what they've just done, even though they know they're there. But when when one horse gets out of the barn, they hate it.
Yeah. Because,
well, then it makes the other horses look kind of bad sometimes when, you're speaking the truth out there.
One of the things, like if you actually want to, you do all the homework so that I can see the specific provisions that you point out when you actually read the legislation. Not that many legislators do that. Justin Amash used to do that, and now you do that. But the thing I like about your position is that if someone honestly wants to understand where you're coming from, they can go on your X feed,
yes,
and see specifically you highlight the provisions.
I link
that say
the whole
this,
bill.
Yeah.
I link the text of the whole bill as it was passed on the floor of the House at that moment, and I take a screenshot and post it in case you don't want to click on the link, or in case the link doesn't work someday. And I put the screenshot of the bill there, and you can read it. And people, it's so funny, people will say, well, the bill, he's lying. The bill doesn't say what he says it does. Meanwhile, there's a picture of the bill right there for them with the section highlighted.
Yeah. I mean, it's not that facts totally matter in these sorts of debates. It's driven by emotion and interests and power and money. So speaking of power and money, you made at least one new enemy. Maybe it's not a new enemy.
It's not new, no. This particular PAC and lobby has been banned from coming to my office for several years because they've run ads against me before. But what I did is, again, they got their money.
Is this actually AIPAC, or is it some spinoff?
Okay. There's a constellation of organizations around AIPAC.
Okay.
They trade employees. They've got the same donors.
Yeah.
I'm going to upset some people right now, but one of these is called Christians United for Israel. There's a particularly more politically oriented group called the Republican Jewish Coalition. There's another group. I don't want to get the names wrong, but there are several groups. There's a spinoff of AIPAC. By the way, AIPAC stands for American Israeli PAC, but PAC isn't Political Action Committee. I forget what it stands for. But they've created a political action committee, United Democracy Project or something like that, which has the same donors, but it has a different mission now, and they trade staff around too. But in any case, it's a super PAC, and they are running ads against me now in my district, or have been for 2 weeks, because I did not vote for the money. Now, what they target is that resolution, because they actually, what they know is if they ran ads against me saying Congressman Massie was the only Republican who didn't vote to send your money overseas, that would just make me more popular among my constituents. So they don't, even though that's what they're mad about, what they pick is the resolution. And they don't really cite any particular bill that I've voted against, so you can't go look at it. They say Congress voted to support Israel. Well, first they start out with the rape and the pillage that occurred, with some very graphic images and dark, background music, and Israel was attacked, and then they describe all the bad things, and then they say that Congress stood up for Israel, but there was one Republican no vote, and then I come on the screen, Thomas Massie voted not to stand with Israel. He voted with AOC, Ilhan Omar, and Rashida Tlaib. And
you should do political ad voiceover.
Anyways, the funny thing is, I don't even have a TV, so I have to go to YouTube to watch the ads or X.
Yeah.
And then I repost them for people to watch.
I'm trying to say X, by the way.
I'm trying to say X. I know. Yeah. So they run this ad. They bought a total of $90,000 of advertising. Roughly, it was $36,000 a TV, $52,000. I'm within a few $1,000s here of radio. By the way, $50,000 of radio. That's like every 30 minutes for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
This ad plays on 3 or 4
Your
stations.
local radio stations are probably loving you right
they
now.
are one of the guys. So I go on the local radio, and one of these guys calls me up, and he goes, "We're making a killing on these ads." I guess at first they didn't want to run the ads, and then so AIPAC bought the ads through iHeart. When I say AIPAC, I mean their super PAC,
Sure,
whatever it's called. they bought that, so they had to go like buy them through a syndicate through like iHeart. So they paid like the most money you can pay for an ad.
Yeah.
And so I told the radio guys, I'm like, soak it up, take all their money,
Yeah.
run as many of these ads as you want. And they're like, all right, well, we'll give them 30 seconds and you can have 20 minutes. So come on the show. Meanwhile, like I'm on the show for 10 minutes and they say, well, okay, we got to go to commercial break. Can you hang on past the break? And I know while I'm on commercial break, they're running the ad and then I come back. So anyways, all in, they ran Facebook ads, all in $90,000, which they could have sent to Israel, by the way, or to somebody that needed it. Instead, they decided to try to make an example of the one Republican who didn't vote for their resolution, who didn't vote for their money, who didn't vote for subsequent resolutions. And
so many of these causes, and you could list an infinite number of them, that they raise money in support of whatever project they want to spend that money to force Congress to spend our money on their favorite project. They never, ever take the money that they raise and send it to the cause that they're supposedly existing for.
Well, if they can bully Congress into it, they get 100-to-1 return.
The ROI is pretty good.
Yeah, spend $14 million on elections, get $14 billion of aid. By the way, AIPAC, when they used to be allowed in my office, would make the case that all of this money we send to Israel is really a stimulus package for the United States because it all comes back. It's basically gift certificates renewable at your local Lockheed Martin and Raytheon outlet stores, right? Like it's not just cash that you can spend on whatever you want. You have to buy advanced U.S. military weapons from U.S. military contractors. So they're more like gift certificates. And AIPAC tried to convince me that, well, you should vote for this because it's just good for the country.
And so, by the way, and I when I was looking at all the hate on your X feed this morning, you have a tweet that summarizes that. Most U.S. foreign aid is money laundering for the U.S. military-industrial complex and its beneficiaries. And your voting record on this question of foreign aid, on this question of whether or not the United States should get involved in these conflicts, is consistent since you got to Congress in 2011.
2012. By the way, beneficiaries in that tweet is left up to the reader to figure out who the beneficiaries are of that money laundering project that goes to the military industrial complex. Some people own stock in those companies who are funding that. There's a little circular feedback loop here.
So I would assume that these ads, I don't know what they're thinking, but I think the goal is to scare other members of Congress who are more easily scarable to fall in line as these votes continue to come through the House and the Senate. Is that your read?
I think that is one of the reads. Like that's why I'm sort of reluctant to put them on X and show everybody what's happening to me.
Yeah.
But I did it anyway. I think the other, when I look for reasons, rational reasons why they might do this other than spite, another rational reason to do it would be to motivate their billionaire donors who might get excited to see, oh, wow, you took some of my money and you're doing that to that guy? All right, I'll pay for that.
Yeah.
That's chump change. $90,000 to rough up a congressman in Kentucky because he wouldn't go along. Well, here's another $5 million. Go have fun with it. So I think it's also possibly showing their donors, hey, these are the kind of things we do.
So I've struggled with this, and you have a more important and very different voice than I have. But I had been hesitant to express a lot of opinions, particularly in the early days of the Hamas attack on Israel, because first of all, in the fog of war, there's so much propaganda, and I wasn't actually confident in any information source that I had. As a libertarian and a non-interventionist and a person that I'm both a principled non-interventionist and a realist when it comes to foreign policy, and I think there's both realist and non-interventionist reasons why this isn't an American fight. But I'm still I have a lot of friends in Israel, so I'm with those guys, and I feel for them. I empathize. I'm horrified by what happened. How do you deal with that as a member of Congress? Because when you express an opinion, it has implications as to what the United States might do about an injustice, the horrible things that happened.
Yeah, well, first of all, propaganda is part of war, and it's going to come from both sides. And they're almost morally obligated to produce it, right? If it's an existential issue for them, anything is on the table, right? So, because this will motivate money and support for their side. It's as important to war as bullets are. Propaganda is. So both sides are going to be doing it. So you have to filter that. You look for verifiable sources. If you know somebody who lives there on either side, or somebody who's immigrated here from there, who has family back there, that's a good source. For instance, Justin Amash, I think maybe you saw his ex, yeah. You can't call it a tweet, where he has some cousins who were...
We're doing this for Elon because on
right.
net, X is better than Twitter.
Yes. He posted pictures of some of his cousins who were Christians who were killed in Gaza from the counterstrikes from Israel. And I don't think Justin Amash is going to make that up. And I think if he's related to these people, he probably knows, did they die, when they died, how they died. He's got family going to the funerals. So there's, people have died on both sides. Innocent people are, casualty of this war. I also have people who live in my district who've immigrated from Israel. One of the things that I learned, when you watch this, you wonder, how could this happen? One question I have is, what are the gun laws in Israel? So when I was 15, 15 to 16, I won an award at the International Science Fair from NASA. And it truly was an international science fair. There was a kid from Israel who also won this award, and we went to California. First time I'd ever been to California, and I stayed in a room with this other, nerd. He was from Israel. I forget what his science project was. And we talked about, I said, have you ever shot a gun? And now, mind you, this was like 1985, 1986. And he said, yeah, I've shot an Uzi. And I was like, what? You shot an Uzi? And he was like 18 or 17. And he said, yeah, there's a law in Israel that if we go on a field trip with a certain number of students, a certain number of people have to be carrying guns. And so we went on this field trip in the desert, and there weren't enough teachers to meet the requirement. So they took the oldest, biggest kids in the class and showed us how to shoot an Uzi. And so some of us were carrying Uzis, and that blew my mind and stuck in my head. So when I'm watching what happened,
life goals, right?
Life goals, yeah. Right? My teacher never gave me an Uzi. Well, I talked to somebody who's a constituent of mine who's from Israel, who immigrated, and I said, I thought you all were armed to the teeth there. And he said, oh, no, that's changed. That was the case in the 80s. But there's been sort of this anti-gun movement. And I guess these, particularly the communities that are closer to the border, have sort of local militias, he was explaining to me, where you're supposed to train on, if you are attacked, here's a local repository of guns that you could use, and you should, drill with these. And he said that they kind of gotten lax, and that recently, again, this is, only one person has told me this, this person could be wrong, but I trust him more than every news thing I've seen because I've known this guy for a decade. And he said, actually, Netanyahu's administration was taking some of those guns back because these were the more liberal people in these areas, and he's the more conservative government, and they didn't really trust them to have these guns. So there was a trend, or has been a trend in Israel to disarm.
I think the trend is real because the first time I went to Israel, I've been there 3 or 4 times, and we started a tea party in Tel Aviv, and I still have a lot of friends there. But because they have mandatory conscription, you have a very well trained population that would be very capable of defending itself. And I was kind of surprised to discover that it's very difficult to own a gun in Israel, something you learned after the attacks. So it must be a newer trend that they're disarming their population, which seems insane to me.
Seems insane to me, given the threats.
Yeah, and this is something I was thinking back to a conversation we had about Ukraine very early on in the Ukrainian conflict. The parliament or the Senate, whatever that body is in Ukraine, suddenly decided, now that they had been invaded by Russians, that they would allow people to have guns again. A little bit too little too late, but it looks like Israel has now done the same thing, and it particularly doesn't make sense in Israel not to have these well-trained people that you've already conscripted into service be ready to defend themselves. Thank you for joining me today on Kibbe on Liberty and for being part of our fiercely independent audience. Every week, my organization, Free the People, partners with BlazeTV to bring you this show. My guests bring smart perspectives on everything from current events to timeless philosophical debates. If you like what you hear, go to freethepeople.org/KOL and support Kibbe on Liberty so we can continue to produce these honest conversations with interesting people. Now, let's get back to it.
So this gets to another question. So your question was, what do you use for sources of information? How do you sift through the propaganda? I look for individual, real touch points of real people that I know. And, also have people I know who've immigrated from Lebanon. They've been American citizens for decades, okay? They went to high school here, and now they're 50 or 60 years old, okay? But they still have family back in Lebanon or that kind of stuff. So those I use for touch points. But this gets us to another question now that we're discussing small arms and whatnot. The $14.3 billion we voted to send to Israel, is it really going to things that will stop something like a terrorist invasion, which was, from the videos that I saw, seemed to be fairly low tech, right? These weren't heat-seeking missiles. These were homemade rockets. These were rubber-tired track loaders, like you might see moving salt at a road department, or sawdust at a sawmill going through fences. These were, low technology drones, for instance, or I don't know about the ultralights or hang gliders or whatever. Are the weapons, the $14.3 billion of gift certificates that are redeemable at Raytheon and Lockheed Martin, is that the kind of thing that would make Israel safer? Or, what are the goals there?
Yeah.
So that's another question that needs to be asked.
So one thing I want to go back to, because I think this is such an important point about the political enemies that you've brought back to your district. The accusation charged against you because you voted against what amounted to a blank check of American involvement in a war in the Middle East was that you were anti-Semitic. They used the A word. Is that true?
That is true. It's in a tweet from AIPAC, who's subsequently been ratioed for their tweet. But in defense of my vote, I tweeted, X'd, whatever. Maybe you can still tweet on X. Okay, I tweeted on X that I'm putting America first, that it's in spite of the pressure, I will not vote to send $14.3 billion overseas. Okay. AIPAC, I think they quote tweeted that and said, this is promoting a dual loyalty trope and it's anti-Semitic. So they called me anti-Semitic for my defense of that vote, and my defense was I'm putting America first. So it's like, man, at the drop of a hat, you can be called anti-Semitic now.
Yeah.
And also, we shortly after that, we had a hearing in Judiciary Committee on, it was supposed to be about free speech on campus. And we were supposed to bring in these kids that have been, silenced on their campus by the administration. But because of the recent events, the current events, they got some new witnesses, or augmented the set of witnesses, and it became a hearing on anti-Semitism. And it was like 3 solid hours of why you shouldn't be able to say certain things on a campus. It like totally became the opposite of what the hearing was supposed to be. And I was kind of so amazed and disgusted that I didn't even ask a question of any of the witnesses. But I heard things said about, anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. That's what the expert witnesses said in this hearing. And that, when you're criticizing Israel, you're criticizing all Jews. And I didn't really buy into that.
So I think about this in the context of, because it is completely blurred, and I think it does a complete disservice to calling out actual anti-Semites. And it's a real thing. It's a real problem. But if you can't criticize the government of Israel, think about that in the context of what you do every day. You and I criticize our own government every day, but we're not allowed to criticize a foreign government. And we can't, it's sort of a collectivist way to think about things. That government and the people in charge of that government in no way reflects the people of Israel. So I want to stand with the people of Israel, but I don't even want to say that because it sounds like propaganda. Because I do have criticisms. I think any libertarian would have criticisms of a government's behavior, and that's not unusual for us.
And so we had the most recent vote last night was, to your point, sort of tying this back to congressional activity, a vote to reaffirm Israel's right to exist. And if the title were the bill, would that be easy vote? Okay.
You'd be a yes.
I'd be a yes. If you want to go seasteading, Matt Kibbe, and create you a floating island and bring on some like-minded people. I sort of do, yeah. Yeah, and they all have to wear handlebar mustaches and black hats and flannel. If that's part of your, Constitution, and that's your country, I recognize your right to exist, and let's get you an ambassador here in Washington, D.C. as soon as possible. And maybe a super PAC, maybe not.
I need a PAC.
I'm going to stop right there. I don't recognize your right to have a super PAC and run ads against me. But you have a right to do that. I respect sovereign countries. Okay, it's part of the problem I have with what we're doing in Syria right now. Syria has a right to exist. Why are we occupying Syria right now? We have soldiers in Syria. There's no authorized war that allows us to be there, and we're there against the sovereign government of Syria. So I recognize Syria's right to exist. I recognize Israel's right to exist, and I thought, well, it's a pretty easy vote. We can finally clear the record, and I can vote yes, and people realize I'm not that bad. And I get it's a 2-page resolution with a dozen whereas clauses, and I get through the whereas. Okay. Now therefore be it resolved. Okay, because this is the important part. What's in the resolved? And they resolved that if you don't recognize Israel's right to exist, you're anti-Semitic. And that's where I stopped, and I said I have a problem with this. Israel's right to have an ethno-national state. Some people might question that. Okay, that doesn't make that. Some Jews might question that. Some Jews do question that, whether that's a good thing. That doesn't make them anti-Semitic. And it's Zionism could be defined a lot of ways. I'll just go with sort of the Wikipedia internet version, simplified American, which is holding up Israel and saying they have this existential right to exist, and we're going to promote Israel and the state of Israel as a homeland for Jewish people. And here I recognized inside of this resolution something that was in the hearing 2 weeks before, which is this notion that if you're not a Zionist, you're anti-Semitic. If you don't, and I reject that. Now, I'm equating a lot of things that might not be equal myself. Like just recognizing Israel's right to exist doesn't make you a Zionist, for instance. But I can see where this is going. And if you're on a campus and you're in a political science class, which I'm a political science denier, it's not a science, but let's say you're in one of these classes talking about governments and theoretical constructs, and you say, well, is it a good idea to have a country that's uniform in race and religion? What kind of problems does that create when there are other people living in that country? Just having that discussion would make you anti-Semitic if you agree to this construct that not recognizing Israel's right to exist makes you anti-Semitic. It gets to the issue of free speech, free thought, and what other country, there are lots of countries, what other country gets a vote in Congress saying they have the right to exist? Like, why are we doing that this week? Part of the reason, and I know this for a fact, like I walk around on the floor of the House of Representatives. I talk to the bill's sponsors, the bill's co-sponsors. I talk to the Speaker of the House. I know about the politics of this. Part of the reason that resolution was brought to the floor last night, and this is half of the resolutions that do nothing. No, probably 90% of the resolutions that do nothing that are brought to the floor by the majority are meant to make the minority look bad. And so this was no exception. They had envisioned this resolution recognizing Israel's right to exist and then putting some stuff in there they thought would cause the Democrats to vote no, would make Democrats look bad. And so this was too cute by half. They thought, okay, we're going to make the Democrats look bad, and then the American Jewish people will recognize they should be Republicans. And so that's a good reason to put this on the floor and force a vote. Well, they forced a vote. They didn't get the outcome they wanted. What happened is I was the only no. Rashida Tlaib voted present. And Ilhan Omar and AOC, they voted for the resolution. So the political scientists, I'm using that as a pejorative, among our conference who thought this would score points politically were too cute by half, and it didn't work for them. Now, I didn't vote no to mess up their plan. I voted no because I think it's a bad idea to equate anti-Zionism with anti-Semitic activity.
Well, you do have this sort of weird perspective that you apply to your vote decision-making matrix, which is constitutional authority. And I know that it's antiquated,
yes,
maybe different, which is a nice segue to another highly controversial vote you made regarding, and I'll screw up the details because it's a week or so ago, which seems like a lifetime, but but there was some sort of effort in the House to defund certain universities that allowed for, I guess, anti-Israel protests.
Mm-hmm.
And those protests were not all the same, and some of them were a lot of the speech was really offensive, and you voted against that. Why?
So first of all, if I would vote against all funding, if you just want to categorically get the federal government out of education, I would do that in a heartbeat.
Which we should.
Yeah, I am the author of the bill to eliminate the Department of Education, the federal Department of Education. So there were some libertarians who were saying, well, you should have voted for this because it was going to withhold money from universities. And aren't you about the debt? And don't you want to withhold money? The problem is there is case law on this. You can't, and also just morally, you shouldn't be trying to use the federal government and federal money to affect speech, okay? And withholding money in this way, conditionally based on things that you couldn't otherwise do. Like the federal government can't say, Matt Kibbe, you're not allowed to say things which are racist or anti-Semitic. Like, deplorable speech is protected, okay? And the federal government can't stop you from saying deplorable things constitutionally. So to pretend that we're going to launder and dilute the Constitution by getting universities to do what we want, by withholding their funding if they don't do what we want, and what we want is to curb First Amendment speech, that doesn't make it constitutional. You can't take 3 steps to accomplish what would be unconstitutional in 1 step and call the 3-step version constitutional. So the resolution would withhold money, all money, not money for anti-Semitic projects, but it would withhold all money from a university that authorized, enabled, supported any kind of activity where anti-Semitic speech was occurring. But authorized, people are saying, oh, well, you're not banning it. It can still happen. They just can't authorize it. But have you been on a campus these days? Like, you want to book a room, an auditorium? The campus administration is authorizing that the minute they say you can use this room to have the speaker come in. And how do you know what the speaker's going to say? So many problems.
Yeah.
And so that was actually for me an easy vote to vote against that. But again, they say, oh, now anti-Semitic.
Yep.
He supports anti-Semitic speech.
Well, think
which
about
is not the case.
I mean, think about the implications since the government is so heavily invested in all of our nominally private institutions. Money is flowing to everything all the time, and this is a big problem with the Department of Education and Title IX and all of that stuff, where we're using that federal stick to force compliance. So you're talking about the infrastructure of a speech code. And it's not just going to be this. It's not just going to be questioning the official narrative on lockdowns or whatever the next thing is that the government wants to impose on us. It's a blank check to really start censoring speech.
And by the way, put this in the context of what I have witnessed in the last 2 or 3 weeks. I've had $90,000 of ads run against me by Zionists. Okay, they're promoting the state of Israel, and they want America to do that. And here's a congressman who's not going along to get along, so they're going to run ads against him. I've been called anti-Semitic for not voting a certain way, okay, to send $14 billion overseas. So now I'm told not voting to give money to Israel is anti-Semitic. I'm told in a hearing in our Judiciary Committee that if you're not Zionist, you're anti-Semitic. In a congressional hearing, sworn testimony, okay? This isn't somebody on X, saying this. And now I see a resolution that I'm supposed to vote that's going to ban anti-Semitism on campuses. But wait, I I see the definition of anti-Semitism growing. By the way, and I think it is against the interests of people who are Jewish who have been discriminated against to expand this definition to include so many ridiculous things that aren't anti-Semitism.
It becomes meaningless.
Correct.
It gives cover for real anti-Semites.
Correct. And so that's where we are.
Yeah. I mean, thinking about the campus thing, and if you guys hadn't gotten involved, it was sort of fun to watch the circular firing squad on these elite universities where they were not allowing certain things, and suddenly they started allowing other things, and it's like maybe they need to reconsider their policies and get back to this ideal where campuses were a place where you could talk about difficult things and you could be anti-war on this side or that side and the other. So their hypocrisy is great, but then you guys came along and spoiled it by making it a political posturing thing that ultimately was just a backdoor to censorship. So I guess I shouldn't say you guys, since you were the only one to vote against it.
I just for running for the office, I'm incriminated just by being here.
So I want to do a lightning round of you've been causing trouble on other things.
I'll try.
And as you know, one of my obsessions, and we've been talking about this, you and I have been talking about this on this show for the last 3 years, we continue to discover just how much the federal government was censoring people, dissidents who were questioning the official narrative on COVID, on lab leaks, on masks, on vaccine mandates, everything else. And as you follow the breadcrumbs, you're discovering that it wasn't this part of this is theory, but part of it is very much the facts that are emerging with Schellenberger's latest revelations. It wasn't public health. It wasn't Fauci, NIH, CDC that were the top of the heap when it came to censoring American speech. It was the Defense Industrial Complex, all of these alphabet agencies, FBI, CIA, DOD, Department of Homeland Security. That seems crazy to me.
So we now call that the censorship industrial complex.
Thank you. That's easier.
Yeah, we have another hearing on that in my weaponization committee this week. And Michael Schellenberger and Matt Kibbe will be there again. They've uncovered some new facts. They're trying to take 3 steps to infringe on your constitutional rights when 1 step wouldn't be allowed. So I know this is supposed to be a lightning round, so I'll go quick. I'll go quicker than I normally would.
You're a member of Congress. You can't go that quickly.
By the way, I'm skipping a GOP conference meeting to do this, so we got a little more time than normal. Those aren't the most productive meetings. Don't worry if you're one of my constituents. I am missing nothing from this meeting. Actually, and this is one of the meetings I'm missing, is where they're trying to shake you down for money, but for the party. So what we found out was that the NSF and other government agencies were funding 501c3s, NGOs, universities to create this web of censorship that would sit there. It had algorithms that would sit there on the internet and look for misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation using algorithms that could, because one human can't sit there and do all this. And so they built this thing, and then they had portals directly to the social media companies, Twitter and Facebook, for instance. And so what happens is the government funds this web of things that ostensibly aren't government, and then with a wink and a nod, and then those folks do the dirty work of sifting through your and my communications, and then send it to the social media companies who want to be in the good graces of government because they're always facing regulation, and some of their contracts come from the government, so they don't want to get on the wrong side of government. And this loop, which took 3 steps instead of 1, is just as unconstitutional as the one-step process, where the government comes in and has a ban button on Twitter.
It's like censorship laundering.
Yes.
Yes.
They are laundering it. One of the interesting things to me is I show up in some of these documents, my tweets as a congressman on my official, not my campaign account, not my personal account, my official account, that where I'm not allowed supposedly to ban people from communicating, from saying the nastiest things they want, curse words and all that. You know, it's just,
which happens.
Which is fine. I'm inviting the trolls. Come over to @Rep Thomas Massie. Get sassy with Massie. That's the hashtag. I love, you know, having dissension on there, and but these organizations were flagging my tweets, especially during COVID, and I was referencing actual articles. One of them was from Israel, like a scientific study in Israel I was referencing. I referenced a Bloomberg curation of a scientific article, and I was getting banned or targeting my communications for being banned. And meanwhile, I'm sitting here in Congress and we're funding the things that are doing this. So I had an amendment prepared. The 12th appropriations bill went down, didn't get to the floor, but I had an amendment to defund this, and I would have loved to got a vote on that. Now, when we do an omnibus, I won't get that vote, but this has happened. It's more pervasive than we thought it was, and we're finding out more and more every day. So, need to stop it.
If you've made it this far into the show, it means I must be doing something right. Kibbe on Liberty is just one of the amazing products we create at Free the People. We tell emotionally compelling stories and produce educational videos for the liberty curious. Our award-winning documentaries personalize all things liberty, independence, creativity, hard work, integrity, and perseverance. After the show, check out our work at freethepeople.org. And if you like what you see, donate to support what we do. That's freethepeople.org. Now back to the show. It's fast. Like, I don't even know how to describe how unethical and unconstitutional it is for the government to be funding third parties to censor American speech, who then end up censoring a member of Congress. That's like next level.
By the way,
unconstitutional.
Yeah, and let's talk about how we got here. We're this core competency of censorship and changing narratives in social media came from. As social media evolved, the CIA recognized it would be a good way to overthrow governments and sow dissension in other countries is when, through Facebook and Twitter. So they worked on these things to create Arab Springs and a revolt in Ukraine. That's where this core competency was developed. And then in 2016, they decided, the Russians are doing this to us, so we need to combat it here. And so it became a domestic competency, and in the name of elections and keeping elections safe, but it's all slanted to one side. So we took what was an externally focused, we recognize it's totally not constitutional, so we pointed it at other countries. Then we pointed it at our own country. And then, after the election, it got pointed on COVID. It became, these are all the same people, the same algorithms. Whatever the thing du jour is, that's what they focus on.
Yeah. Maybe now Israel.
Yep.
What's next? Pelosi, mask mandate. You are still fighting that fight, and remind people what happened and what the legal challenge is.
So we're 2 years into this fight. I said, if I got to take it to the Supreme Court, I will. And this week we filed for cert. That is, we filed asking the Supreme Court to take up our case. We were dismissed at the district and circuit level, but the logic that those judges used basically nullifies the 27th Amendment to the Constitution. I think by the way, let me back up. I am suing Nancy Pelosi, the Sergeant at Arms, and the Chief Administrative Officer of the House. These are the three named defendants for reducing my salary in order to compel me to wear a mask, or to try to compel me to wear a mask. Eventually, it didn't work. And that's what gave me standing, is they reduced my salary. The 27th Amendment says that you can't pass a law, which any congressional action has the weight of a law, that reduces or increases, it says vary, but that varies a member's salary without an intervening election. 27th Amendment was one of 12 amendments that were proposed that included 10 that became the Bill of Rights, right? There were 2 that weren't ratified, and one of them was what became the 27th Amendment. It was ratified over 200 years later. If you go back and look at the founders' discussion of the 27th Amendment, it's clear the reason they put the word vary salary instead of increase salary is it was common knowledge that you could twist a man's will, bend a man's will to your means if you could affect his sustenance, if you could. And so they said, and by the way, the Constitution says you can't, it also says you can't reduce a judge's salary in the course of their tenure. So for the same reason, they had proposed this when they proposed the Bill of Rights. It became 27th Amendment. Nancy Pelosi violated it. The facts aren't in question. She reduced my salary. Okay. And I regret this is a fight about a Congress member's salary. I can read the room. I have situational awareness. I know I'm losing sympathy every second that I say my salary shouldn't have been reduced. There's some people say it should be 0. But much like my constituents were coerced into taking a vaccine or wearing a mask, I was coerced in the same way. Your employment was threatened. Your job was threatened. If your salary was reduced if you were an airline pilot and wouldn't take it, like they used all these other means.
Was there a point where unvaccinated congressmen had to wear a mask and other members didn't? Wasn't that a thing?
That is the point. So Nancy Pelosi in a press conference was asked, when will congressmen no longer have to wear a mask on the floor? And she said, when every one of them is vaccinated. And that is the moment when I said, I'm taking off the mask. This crap stops here. And I got 10 members of Congress to go with me. During a vote series, we knew where the C-SPAN cameras would point, and we stood there, all 10 of us, most of them women, by the way, without our masks on, and made sure that everybody in the country could see we were going against this. And then we subsequently got fined. And by the way, Marjorie Taylor Greene and Ralph Norman are my co-plaintiffs in this case. All right, so why did they dismiss our case at the district and circuit level? They said that the speech or debate clause in the Constitution, which gives Nancy Pelosi immunity, according to them, and for official actions. By the way, that's a good clause in the Constitution. I like it. It's an extra super duper special free speech clause for members of Congress. And and the reason the founders put that in there is the king and the executive branches, would punish members of parliament for things they said in the course of, their job in parliament. And our founders didn't want members of Congress to be tormented by these libel and defamation laws, which would definitely be the case. Can you imagine the sort of lawfare every day that would be conducted on congressmen if we could be held accountable for libel and defamation in courts? We can't be. And I think that's a good thing. But and then so the courts have decided that that's pretty broad, and it includes any actual legislative action is speech. And so they're saying that Pelosi is immune, and also by association, her deputies, I call them the Deep Congress, Sergeant at Arms, the administrative branch of the Congress. Here's the problem with that with their ruling. There's no way to enforce the 27th Amendment. Members of Congress, according to the district and circuit court's logic, we could go to the floor today and each give ourselves $1 million. We could vote for that without an intervening election, in contravention of the 27th Amendment, direct and flagrant contravention of the 27th Amendment. And if somebody complained and brings it to the D.C. District Court, there's a precedent that says, well, they can vary their salary all they want. They're covered by the speech or debate clause. I do not believe that the speech or debate clause was meant to give us the ability to do unconstitutional things without being held accountable for it. For instance, can we, if somebody doesn't vote for a vote on Israel, can they be flogged on the floor of the House? Can we erect a gallows? Can we execute members of Congress as a punishment for violating a House rule? I think that
you probably shouldn't float these hypotheticals, by the way.
Well, I mean, I
because somebody's taking notes right now,
and I'd be the first one in the gallows.
Right.
Okay, so I think it's an unsustainable ruling. They've nullified the 27th Amendment. They've said it's not. Basically, they've said it's not enforceable, and so we're asking the Supreme Court to take this up and answer the question of, is speech or debate clause absolute, and does it cover even unconstitutional acts that were prohibited by the well, that's kind of redundant, but implemented after it, chronologically. I would say an amendment to the Constitution affects things that were in the base Constitution. So the base Constitution says that each house can make its own rules, and they give you a lot of leeway there. But we're saying the one rule they can't make is messing around with our salaries to get us to do stuff, because that's the 27th Amendment. And since it comes after the phrase that says you can make any rule you want, and it says, but you can't make this rule, you can't do this, then this affects that. We'll see if the Supreme Court will take it up. It's the probability, if you're just looking at raw probability of people who apply to get their cases heard at the Supreme Court and the number of cases that get taken up, it's extremely small. But our chances of having it taken up are heightened or improved by the fact that this is a constitutional issue, that the 27th Amendment was ratified in 1992, and there's not a whole lot of case law defining what it really means. And it goes to the base Constitution and the way Congress operates. So hopefully they'll take it up and we'll get an answer.
So this reminds me of another very popular position you've taken, and I want to give some context for this.
Popular. I'm betting that's facetious.
I'm being sarcastic, and I think a lot of conservatives, a lot of Republicans, libertarians, everyone's like, heck yeah, on this. You're suing Nancy Pelosi for trying to bully you into wearing a mask, but the same principle applies to your vote on the Adam Schiff censorship.
I knew you were going there.
And we should qualify this by pointing out that Adam Schiff is not a good guy. I don't know if you're allowed to say that, but I find him to be one of the most reprehensible members of Congress
I'm not obligated.
Quite some time.
I'm not obligated to defend him when you say that. That's to say all you want.
But there's a lot of conservatives that were just a second ago, heck yeah, and now they're like, hold my beer. The libs have weaponized government against us, and now that we have control of the House, we can go after one of their guys and strip him of his salary. And you said that, no, we can't do that. That's unconstitutional.
Right. So just to attenuate the hate that I'm going to receive, I did vote for the resolution that took Adam Schiff off the Intel Committee, because I think he abused his access to information there, which not all members of Congress have that same access. He mischaracterized that and betrayed trust. And I did vote to censure him. Okay. It may not have been a smart vote. He raised $8 million on it, and he's raised for Senate just by, hey, look at what Congress is doing to me. But what I did not vote for, sort of infamously, and I leaned into this. There were other members of Congress, but I was the only one defending the vote, so I became the lightning rod for from conservatives who were upset with me. I did not vote to take $16 million from this man with a simple majority of a congressional vote. There's lots of issues there to unpack. I know we're in speed round, but there was no due process. How are we going to collect $16 million? Well, the only way that they've ever discovered is the way they used to collect the fine from me. They garnish your salary, and they would reduce his salary to nothing. So it would be, and it would, if they could go beyond that and actually get the $16 million, his financial disclosure forms show that he's not worth $16 million. He would be bankrupt. And some people say, well, you could take it out of his campaign, let him pay for it with his campaign. So that would also bankrupt his campaign for Congress. So basically what you're doing at that point is he either has to leave Congress to avoid becoming bankrupt, or he can't get reelected because we're taking all of his campaign money. So you're basically evicting him from Congress, which we have provision for that in the Constitution. It requires a 2/3 vote to kick somebody out of Congress, but that wasn't the vote. And so you can't creatively come up with ways to kick somebody out of Congress with a majority vote when the Constitution requires a 2/3 vote. And it's just not sustainable. The only reason it could ever work is we're in the majority. And then when we go in the minority, they're going to do that to us. And people say, well, you should do that to them before they do it to you. Don't be so naive.
It's funny, like you sit on the, what is it called, the weaponization of government
yes.
committee, and your side very righteously says that the government was used against conservatives, it was used against Republicans, it was used against critics of anything that the government was doing. But there is this tendency amongst some conservatives to say, hold my beer. Now that we have power, let's do the exact same thing that they did to us, not thinking that 2 years from now, Democrats could have a majority in the House, they could have a majority in the Senate, they could have the presidency. And it's, I don't know exactly how to fix this, because people are just now like, they've thrown aside the Constitution and they're just pissed now. They want vengeance.
Yeah, we're in a post-constitutional social media mob era right now. And people tell me, you need to quit being naive, quit clinging to these romantic notions of defending the Constitution, and get real and start fighting with the gloves off. And I don't know anybody that fights harder than me in Congress. But the problem is, if you abandon the Constitution, then what are you fighting for? You're not really fighting for anything.
Yeah. Okay. And this final question, it's a big can of worms, and I've actually wanted to do an entire show on this, and maybe we will sometime. But January 6th, and the latest videotapes have been released. You've been very vocal specifically on the question, I think going back for a year, 2 years. I don't know when you first started asking those questions of the FBI.
I've asked the Attorney General, Merrick Garland. I've asked the FBI Director, Christopher Wray.
How many feds were in that crowd fomenting violence?
Correct. And they will not answer that question. They refuse to answer it. And as time goes on, we have more and more reason to believe that that number is not zero. We know it's not zero. And the question is, what sort of things were they saying? What sort of things were they engaged in? And it would be naive to think that among that crowd, there weren't some people doing that who were acting on behalf of our government. Because look at what they did in Michigan with the Governor Whitmer kidnapping ploy. Most of those people were agents or assets of the government. There's so many people who've been convicted. I think that would be exculpatory to their cases to know that if there were agents who were basically entrapping them or encouraging them to do that. I'm not defending their actions, but it does color their actions. And we need to know, because if you go back and look at in Ukraine in 2014, when we actually fomented the overthrow of the government there, it looks very similar. The people outside of the Capitol doing things. I'm not saying this was an attempted overthrow of the government here, but how many federal assets were there doing that? We need to know. And there's also, I'm supposed to get a briefing on the pipe bomb issue. This thing is sketchy as all get out. The government claims I've been in a room with the head FBI person in charge of the DC field office of the investigation doing a sworn deposition. Not all of this has been released, but where he told me that the cell phone data was corrupted, and that's why they can't figure out, that may be why they can't figure out who that person was, the suspect they have on video that seems like they were planning those 2 fake pipe bombs. They were fake. So,
Were you shocked to discover that the phone data was corrupted?
He seemed shocked. He seemed embarrassed to tell me when he said it. He's like, no, I don't want to fuel any conspiracy theories, but, it was not intentionally. And then he goes, well, I don't know that it was intentionally, but to my knowledge, not intentionally corrupted, and we couldn't get it. And then I got some of the, I'm not sure all the January 6th video is released yet, by the way. And I think it should all be released. And whatever, they're saying it will compromise our security. Whatever we have to change after those videos are released, then we should just change it. Because this is too important not to get it all out there. Some of the video that I got released, I think shows who found the second pipe bomb at the DNC. What are the odds that a pipe bomb sat there, looks like a Wile E. Coyote Acme pipe bomb, from the cartoons, sat there for 16 hours and then got discovered within 20 minutes of the other pipe bomb that got discovered by some random passerby. Anyways, we think we've got on video, and I got the video released. I showed it to Christopher Wray. He wouldn't comment on it. We think we got video of the person who found that second pipe bomb informing the police. I want to know who that person is. Was that an undercover officer? How did he know to find it? Why did they quit looking after they found that one? Lots of questions that still need answered there.
You mentioned something earlier about censorship and how we've created this weapon that we aim at other countries to manipulate elections and public opinion and all that stuff. Glenn Greenwald has been really interesting voice on this question of January 6th and whether or not the feds were manipulating this crowd to get them to do something. But it's the same process, right? We're either going to manipulate speech and social media online, create hysteria and anger in a certain direction, or we're going to do this. And I say this I want to talk about it because as it happens, I was doing Glenn Beck's podcast on January 7th of that year. And so naturally we talked about this. And as a former community organizer, I know that's a dirty word, but we went out of our way in the Tea Party days to train people on nonviolence. Never take the bait. Never, ever let the left catch you doing something inappropriate or violent or angry or anything else. And so when I saw all of this happening, I'm like, they just completely screwed up. Yeah. And they've created this narrative, which somebody has created this narrative that Trump conservatives are violent people. And now the question is, who created that narrative?
So one of the things I'm so glad I did, I was part of a group of 6 congressmen who published on January 3rd, 3 days before, a statement. And the reason we put that out, there was some discussion about whether we should wait until after January 5th. Remember, there was an election for Senate down in Georgia?
Yeah.
And some of the congressmen were like, well, we should wait. We don't want to color that vote down there, that election down there. But I said, and I was adamant, we need to publish this now. We need to get it out a few days before January 6th, because people are getting on buses and coming here, and no good's going to come out of that. And so on January 3rd, it's indelible. You can't take it off the internet. Chip Roy and Nancy Mace and Kelly Armstrong and myself published a document saying, basically, we don't like how everything was done, but our job as congressmen isn't to adjudicate whether these are the electors they should have sent from the state. We're just supposed to adjudicate, are these the electors they sent? That's the extent of our adjudication. And, the reason, I can say this now, I was so adamant that we put that out on January 3rd instead of January 5th after that Senate election was, I thought this was not going to turn out well. And then on January 5th, the night of January 5th, I was at another congressman's townhouse, and there were 5 or 6 congressmen gathered there. And I said, I'll go get dinner and bring it back. And when I went out, it just felt like explosive. It felt like a tinderbox. And I thought, this is like, to use a farm analogy, it seemed like a 50-pound bag of feed, and the stitches were about to bust, and all that feed was going to go on the ground. And I commented to some people, like, it felt bad. And I think it was a situation that was easy to manipulate, and I think it was manipulated.
Yeah. Well, one, went over time, and 2, I think we broke a record, because I think every single person in the country is angry at you right now for at least one of your positions, because we've taken all. And that was totally my goal, is to just let's see if we can get people more upset at Massie.
I am fine with that. I am consistent. Very few people can argue that I'm not consistent, and I'm consistent even if it makes you upset sometimes, even if it's not the outcome that I wanted. And I think that's what you'll see over all these votes that I've taken. Hopefully, when I leave Congress, and I am running for re-election, but when I eventually don't run for re-election, I will have the most peace in my head, peace of mind, that any member of Congress has ever had after they left. There will be no regrets, and that is the way I approach every vote. Will I regret having compromised on this issue or that when I'm back in my rocking chair on my porch in Kentucky? And the answer, I hope, is I will not regret any of it.
I assume that your local radio station friends are quite excited that you're running again. It's going to be quite a cash cow.
There are people outside of my district trying to recruit somebody inside of my district to run against me right now over a foreign policy issue.
Yeah.
That kind of excites me. Hey, if I've got advocates of foreign governments in my district trying to get me unelected, I'm probably doing something right for America.
Oh, you won't shy away from a fight. We know that.
No.
Thank you, Congressman.
Thanks, Matt.
Thanks for watching. If you liked the conversation, make sure to like the video, subscribe, and also ring the bell for notifications. And if you want to know more about Free the People, go to freethepeople.org.